Welcome back to Screen Sleuths. I'm Rob, and now that I don't have to represent Rusty since his counsel are back, let's dive into Presumed Innocent, Episode 7, The Witness. With only one episode left in the season, and answers on the horizon, yes, season finale because if you didn't know, Presumed Innocent was renewed for Season 2. I want to cover who we believe are the four most likely candidates to have been the murderer and why. First, I do want to cover one person who we do not see being the murderer that I am ruling out in this discussion, and that is Tommy Molto. Okay. I know Tommy is a squirrely guy, and a lot of the community is convinced he's the killer. But there's one specific clue that proves to me that he's not the guilty party. The murder weapon. One of the deeper thoughts that crossed our minds is that potentially someone found the fire poker looking around in Tommy's house and left the trophy as a warning that the person knew he was the killer. But that just wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. Because if Tommy was the one who committed the crime and he was concealing the weapon, leaving the note and not taking it with them would not accomplish anything in proving Tommy to be guilty, and thus would not make any sense for that to be the reason for our final scene in this episode. So, Tomasino and his bolo tie are off the hook in our investigation. Also, real quick, Dr. Kumagai has no motive other than possible disdain for Rusty, but there's no proof that he ever even knew Rusty and Carolyn were in a relationship. And as far as Carolyn concealing evidence he provided, he also did not seem to be aware of that until after her death, so I'm counting him out as well. And Brian Ratzer, he's been a very shady character in the show, but he has no specific connection to Carolyn other than the Bunny Davis case that he spent so long avoiding. Now let's get to the good stuff. Who's still on the hot seat? In order of least to most likely, let's begin with Eugenia. The most informed co-worker of Carolyn and Rusty's relationship, Eugenia has had a penchant for showing up in more scenes than maybe seemed necessary. Most of that involvement has pointed to her being Rusty's biggest proclaimer of innocence, which, without any additional knowledge, would point to her possible involvement or infatuation with Rusty as well. And after the conversation we see in Rusty's car this episode, I would point to infatuation based on the rather harsh back and forth that has most likely faded at this point. Additionally, her asking Rusty straight out whether she informed him that she was going to keep the baby plants a seed of doubt that maybe he was guilty in Eugenia's mind. Or is this just a red herring? Does this just throw us off the scent of her committing the act after Rusty left, but just wanting the information for her own knowledge? She is still on the list, but she's at the bottom going into episode 8. Coming in third, let's talk Barbara Savage. Barbara has seemed detached and suspicious from the jump to myself and many others. Admittedly, much of her reaction to the events has been shock, which is to be expected. But let's examine the different clues throughout the season that could be pointing to her. We know that Barbara was aware of Rusty and Carolyn's relationship, so we definitely have one of the strongest motives to point to. We also know that she and her son Kyle have had conversations that Rusty and we as the audience have not been privy to. There is still a plausible timeline in which Kyle rode by Carolyn's house, as we saw in the pictures Michael took, told his mom that the affair was happening again, and in a fit of rage, Barbara made it to Carolyn's home and acted on her jealousy. Also, something that applies to everyone on this list, there has to be some potential knowledge of the Liam Reynolds trial to allow for the person to know how Bunny Davis was tied up to recreate it to the certain extent. Barbara could have seen the images of that crime scene, similar to how she saw the photos of the Polimas scene at home. The other aspect I will point to has been her seeming need to distract herself from the case. This is a two-sided argument as well. Is she looking for other means because she cannot live with the thought that her husband may have committed this crime, especially after she stayed with him through all of the difficult times? Or is she looking for means of staying away from the trial, knowing that she is the guilty one, but not leaving Rusty to potentially shield herself and her family from implicating herself? If Rusty is found not guilty and they attempt to change direction, does Barbara believe she can hold spousal privilege and not reveal what actually happened? I go back to her cleaning Kyle's bike so thoroughly as well, where that seemed like the reaction of someone who was just as afraid for their own safety as she was for Kyle's. And silver medal goes to the one and only Rusty Savage. Yes, our main focus of the show, our not-so-lovable star. If you listen to our breakdown of episode 6, I explain the thoughts there a bit further, but let's just look at the season as a whole. Rusty clearly can act out violently when angry, as was so eloquently laid out by Tommy Molto in court. We also get painted a very clear picture of his extreme obsession with Carolyn to the point of near stalking. So, we again have plausible motive. A crime carried out in the heat of the moment between two lovers in a difficult time. We also know he has full detailed knowledge of the Bunny Davis case at his disposal. Barbara calls to our attention in episode 7 that Rusty has recently started taking his Ritalin again because of the trial. I'm far from an expert on medical matters, but the thought of introducing this information at such a time in the show makes it suspicious that he may have potentially had an issue in the past when not taking it. Ritalin withdrawal can cause the side effect of experiencing depression, which could that have compounded the effects of the situation, leading Rusty to act out so violently? Then, as we discussed last week, did he suppress his memories the way Jaden spoke to him about, and give us a classic Jekyll and Hyde situation where he no longer remembers actually committing the act due to his subconscious? We have very clearly started to assume that there may have been two people involved due to the very chaotic attack and the meticulous nature of the staging. This could point to the two sides of Rusty, both acting out wildly and the Dr. Jekyll who set up the crime scene. But now, the moment you've been waiting for, suspect number 1. Make that suspects. It's the Caldwell clan. Yes, that's right, we are sticking to the two-person theory. Michael and Dalton Caldwell are now under the magnifying glass. We have motive. Michael has been extremely vocal about his anger at his mother in his exchanges with her in the past. We still have yet to get an answer why they were estranged from Carolyn. Michael clearly has an alibi that Rusty seemed to put a hole in when pointing out that he and his father are each other's only corroborators. Also, when on the stand, the only points that he has ever made clearly were that it was his, quote, impression that Rusty killed his mother, he was at the scene of the crime the night of, and that he does not remember if or what he told his father when he returned home. This line of questioning also riles up Dalton, his father, to which he verbally attacks Tommy for not protecting him. So, that places Michael as a possible suspect for committing the act in the wild, unplanned manner. Now, we see Dalton as a concerned parent trying to protect his son through all of the questioning, but is this because he knows what actually happened? Dalton could have potentially had similar access as Barbara to the Bunny Davis information if he and Carolyn were not completely separated at the time of the case. That could point to the calculated staging of the crime scene by someone who may have made it appear close, but not exactly the same. This theory points to us seeing an angry Michael attacking his mother after Rusty left, fleeing home to his father, and admitting to what happened. Dalton, wanting to protect him, returns to Carolyn's house and stages the scene based off of the most memorable and prominent case he can think of, his ex-wife's first conviction. He then concealed the fire poker until now, when he was so upset by Tommy's inability to keep the heat off of Michael, believes that Michael and he are now possibly suspects in the case. He and his son were not present the day of Rusty's testimony on the stand, which would keep him from knowing that the heat may be off, and because of how rattled Tommy made Rusty. But it also gave him the time to break into Malto's house while the trial was going on. The anger he had at Tommy being shown in the note left on the weapon. Okay, thank you for sticking around and hearing who our list of suspected candidates are. We'll be back next week to break down the reveal and see what theories we may have hit on the head. Too soon? As always, if you're a fan of what we're doing here at the channel, please be sure to like and subscribe to let the algorithm, the ultimate judge, know that we're on the right track. And until next week, stay sleuthy.